Welcome back, Truth Seeker. It is February 4th, 2025, the 35th day of the year. Of course, in Gematria, China equates to 35. China slams Trump's tariffs, and today is the day that they go into effect. So here's the news. Beijing announced a broad package of economic measures targeting the United States on Tuesday, hitting back after U.S. President Donald Trump imposed 10% tariffs on Chinese imports. The fresh duties announced by China's Ministry of Finance levy a 15% tax on certain types of coal and liquefied natural gas and a 10% tariff on crude oil, agricultural machinery, large displacement cars, and pickup trucks. The measures take effect on February 10th. The Ministry of Commerce and China's Customs Administration also announced new export controls effective immediately on more than 24 metal products and related technologies. Those include tungsten, a critical mineral typically used in industrial and defense applications, as well as tellurium, which can be used to make solar cells. The ministry also said it was adding two American firms, biotech company Illumina and fashion retailer PVH Group, owner of Calvin Klein and Tommy Hilfiger, to its unreliable entities list, saying they violated normal market trading principles. A Ministry of Commerce spokesperson said Tuesday that it found PVH discriminated against and interfered with the operation of Chinese companies, though the spokesperson failed to provide specifics. PVH criticized the decision and said it would work with Chinese authorities to resolve the situation. We are surprised and deeply disappointed to learn of the decision from the Chinese Ministry of Commerce, a spokesperson for PVH said in a statement. In our 20 years of operating in China and proudly serving our consumers as a matter of policy, PVH maintains strict compliances with all relevant laws and regulations and operates in line with established industry standards and practices. For you younger people, there was a huge outcry with Nike outsourcing and the way they treated their workers in China over 20 years ago. So since then, there's been other companies trying to say, look, we're not as bad. In a separate statement, China's State Administration for Market Regulation said it was initiating an investigation into Google for suspected violation of its anti-monopoly. The company whose search engine is not available in China, has minimal operations in the country. The raft of announcements comes as a broad-based 10% tariff on Chinese imports to the United States announced by White House on Saturday came into effect. So, again, here we are on Tuesday, the 35th day of the year. When again in Gematria, China equals 35. And if you never heard of that word Gematria, you should look it up because it shows through the ritualism every day. And it should remind you of past leaders like Bush talking about a new world order. Again, you learn this code, you see how everything is ritualistic across the world in the headlines day after day. And how does China equal 35? By just turning the letters into numbers using the alphabetic order. C is the third letter, A, B, C. H is the eighth letter, I is the ninth, N is the 14th, A is the first. You add it together, China 35. So how fitting that on the 35th day of the year this is happening. China's measures appear to vary in their potential impact on the U.S. economy and businesses. For example, China is the leading global producer of tungsten concentrates, representing more than 80% of world production, according to U.S. government estimates from 2020. The tariffed items, however, represent a relatively small proportion of overall bilateral trade. Oh, Ruby. Waking up can be difficult. The measures are fairly modest, at least relative to U.S. moves, and have clearly been collaborated to try to send a message to the U.S. and domestic audiences without inflicting too much damage. Julian Evans Pritchard, head of China economics at Financial Insight from Capital Economics, said in a research note Tuesday. The Chinese tariffs target at most 20 billion of the country's annual imports from the U.S., about 12% of the total, which is a far cry from more than 450 billion in Chinese goods being targeted by the U.S., he added. You gotta love that, more than 450 with number 45 back in office. Beijing had slammed those tariffs in a statement Sunday and vowed to resolutely defend its rights by filing a complaint with the World Trade Organization and taking corresponding countermeasures. In a statement Tuesday, China's Commerce Ministry confirmed that it had brought the Trump administration tariff measures to the WTO dispute settlement mechanism. The U.S. practice seriously undermines the rules-based multilateral trading system, undermines the foundation of economic and trade cooperation between China and the United States, and disrupts the stability of the global industrial chain and supply chain, the ministry said. A new trade war? The Chinese measures announced on the final day of China's week-long New Year holiday, and here we've entered the year of the snake, mark what could be the opening salvo of a new tit-for-tat trade war between Washington and Beijing. However, they don't rule out the possibility of further dialogue of deal-making between the two sides. Don't forget how often Trump used to tell that speech or that poem to his crowd about, "You knew I was a snake, and you let me in." The White House had announced the 10% tariffs on Chinese imports on Saturday as part of a broader trade measure, also targeting Mexico and Canada. Part of what the Trump administration said was a bid to hold those countries accountable for illegal immigration and the flow of fentanyl and other drugs into the U.S. Yesterday, you guys, was the 34th day of the year. Tariffs has that gematria 34. Yesterday, Trump agreed to immediately pause the tariffs on Canada and Mexico. So big news on the weekend, and then on the 34th day of the year, news by the numbers, they're paused. But now they remain with China, our biggest trade partner, where the trade war again begins on the 35th day of the year. Just news by the numbers all day, every day. Trump agreed to immediately pause tariffs on Mexico and Canada after holding separate calls with those countries' leaders Mondays. And remember, that's because they said they threatened to impose tariffs back, which would just super escalate prices for everybody. The day before the duties on goods from all these countries were meant to come into effect, both leaders had agreed to strengthen security along their borders. Trump said Monday that he expected he could speak with Chinese leader Xi Jinping in the next 24 hours. Beijing has yet to confirm any call. A White House spokesperson said later Monday the call could happen in the next couple of days. This potential exchange comes as Beijing and Washington aim to set the tone for their relationships and navigate a raft of thorny issues, including a gaping trade deficit, a tech and military rivalry, and the fentanyl trade. U.S. law enforcement believes a number of China-based entities supply precursor chemicals which can be used to make finished fentanyl in labs operated by drug cartels in the U.S. and Mexico. Canada makes up to 0.2% of U.S. border fentanyl seizures. 0.1%. Beijing has defended its efforts to control exports of the precursor chemicals used to produce fentanyl and said the latest tariffs would erode the foundation of trust and cooperation in the field of drug control between China and the United States. The Shanghai Stock Index was still closed Tuesday for the Lunar New Year holiday, but stock markets elsewhere in Asia closed higher. Hong Kong's Hang Seng Index rose 2.8%, Japan's Nikkei Index was up 0.7%, and South Korea's Kospi was up 1.1%. Both fell Monday. U.S. stock futures were relatively flat. Again, yesterday, the U.S. stock market took a big dip in the morning and then climbed up but finished at negative 122. All right. Let me skip down here a little bit. Or hold on. There was another related article talking about what will likely get more expensive for people curious about that. And today the market's up a little bit so far after saying, okay, no tariffs with Canada and Mexico, positive response, but we'll see what this China thing does. Let's see. I thought there was a list of goods they expect to get better. I'll just read a bit of this real quick. Need a new computer, television, or phone? You might want to consider getting one now. That's because President Donald Trump enacted a new 10% across-the-board tariff on Chinese goods Tuesday morning. It's funny how that could stimulate consumerism right now, and this is usually a dead part of the year for consumerism, the beginning of the year after the holidays when people spend more than they should. Economists warn that tariffs hurt American businesses and consumers, many of whom are still reeling from the sharp rise in inflation in recent years. Tariffs are paid by U.S. importers, not the countries at which the tariffs are aimed, as Trump has claimed. Those costs are often passed on to retailers and eventually American consumers, of course. Didn't anyone go to school? Adam Smith taught us all this. Unlike Mexico and Canada, which largely avoids tariffs on exports to the United States because of the current USMCA trade agreement that Trump signed in his first term, and a wide array of Chinese goods already faced tariffs before Tuesday. Trump also ordered 25% tariffs on Mexican and Canadian goods, but delayed them until March 1st. And March 1st is the 60th day of the year, right? Like Donald Trump equals 60. Like we just had the 60th inauguration and the 60th election where Donald Trump's ex-wife fell down the stairs and died exactly 60 weeks into the first Jesuit Ignatian year, 45 years after their marriage. In addition to the new 10% tariff, Chinese goods are subject to additional tariffs, 100% tariff on electric vehicles and 25% tariff on steel and aluminum products, but several items have been exempt from tariffs. So, again, the majority of our computer stuff comes from China. The only thing could really help is that in the long run, somehow, some way, it'd bring more production back to the U.S. and it would be beneficial to both the job market and consumers. But it seems like for the time being, it's only going to make things more expensive. One of the biggest exemptions had been consumer electronics, but the exemption is no longer in place with the new across-the-board tariffs. That matters because consumers' electronics are among the top goods for U.S. imported from China last year, according to federal trade data. Communications equipment accounted for 12%, or $47 billion, of the $401 billion worth of goods the U.S. imported from China last year, not accounting for December, making it the single top category of goods that U.S. imported from there. All right, we'll leave it there for now, Truth Seeker. But yeah, the main thing is the trade war begins on the 35th day of the year after teaching about China and 35 rituals since forever. And again, just pay attention to the markets on Thursday, because when we were doing our markets group, I was showing how Chinese stocks, Thursday is the only day of the week that equals 35. Chinese stocks, they'll be like in a pattern where they'll increase for 5 weeks, and then they'll dip, and then they'll fall off for a few weeks, and then they'll start climbing again. Again, you learn how this game is rigged. You can take advantage of it. That's from rig sports to the market to crypto. It's all by the numbers. Until next time, Truth Seeker.